All right, folks, we are back. And just a quick plug, of course, for our upcoming London trip. We are about 10 days out from registrations closing. So if you're listening to this and you're still considering, please give us a shout. Contact at londonisbluepodcast.com and we'll get you sorted. We'll get you in contact with XL Tours if you have any questions, want to extend your trip, do whatever. There's plenty of options. So shoot us an email and yeah, look forward to seeing you there. Matt, let's talk injuries, because even since the last time that we talked, the list has seemingly grown. Of course, you have folks like Fofana and Badiashile who have been out for some time, unsure of their return. At this point, we'll kind of see what's going on. Maybe Benoit gets back in February, but who knows at this point. Mudryk obviously out for different issues, but we had the inclusion of a pretty healthy injury list from Maresca on Friday, pre-Wolves game, saying Levi Colwill not in the session. Other players have doubts. Enzo Fernandez is one of those players. Romeo Lavia continues to be one of those players. And Cole Palmer obviously got a whack on his ankle and did not look his kind of standard self last night. Where do you start? I mean, I think most worrying is midfield, but Levi being a surprise inclusion there. What are you hearing about that?
Yeah, well, look, Enzo said last night that Levi should be okay for Man City game. It feels like he probably did need to miss last night, but it also feels slightly precautionary and trying to be sensible with him, given that Fofana is out for, if not the rest of the season, the big chunk of the rest of the season. Right. So it sounded encouraging on Fofana. Doesn't sound like, sorry, not Fofana, Colwill. Sounded encouraging on Colwill, and that he should be on his way back pretty soon. It looks like they think he'll be back for City. Enzo Fernandez, I think they think will be back pretty soon. He's probably touch and go for City. I think they hope he can make it, but if he doesn't make it, I think he's back after that. So that's quite close. Lavia, I'm not quite sure how long Lavia will be out, but I'm told it will be weeks. I don't know how many weeks. So I think Lavia, we're looking at missing a few games again, at least, to be honest with you. Yeah. And that's tough. It was a sort of a proper injury picked up within the Bournemouth game. Not a recurrence, not something in training. And I think it's like a hyperextension. I'm not very technical with all these kind of things, but yeah, he's out. He's out for a few weeks. So they are a little bit light in midfield. But I have some news that you may be pleased to hear. I do think they will assess that midfield situation before the end of the transfer window, with that injury in mind, and also with the fact of if Vega goes, if Casadei goes, not quite sure on Dewsbury Hall at the moment, it could force them to either do something or reassess whether they bring a loan back. I think they'll look at it late in the window and take a view late, but they are aware that if the Lavia injury is a few weeks, and that if Casadei and Vega, who can fill in midfield in a certain type of match, let's say, were to go, then they could be left a little bit short.
A little bit. I mean, what, do you want me playing out there? Like, what's going on? I mean, it's insane. I mean, I think one of the things that stood out to me from the Wolves game, Matt, and it was earlier, later in the first half, I believe, if my memory serves, you saw Caicedo go down holding his knee, and I think
yes, that was a worrying moment.
The collective blood pressure of Stamford Bridge went through the roof at that point, because I mean, who else? Who else was there last night to do any of those roles? I mean, we've had folks bring up that Trev can play in central midfield, probably more as an emergency option at this point, not as kind of a standard bit of positioning. But how much more thin do they need to make this before they actually try and solve the issue?
Well, the other interesting thing was Maresca was asked outright last night whether Dewsbury Hall situation would have to change because of injuries and worse. And he actually said no. I mean, he made it quite clear that they're not going to allow an injury situation impact what they believe should happen for the future. His answer was kind of like, well, look, Dewsbury Hall's not as up for sale, but we're not saying no in January, and a few injuries aren't going to change that. It feels more like they would still let the players out, i.e. the Vegas, the Cassadeys and the Dewsbury Halls, and they would just look at whether they have to bring players back or whether they have to accelerate something they might be looking at as a possibility for the summer, and accelerate it into January. It feels more like they would do it that way than actually say to players, you can't leave, which is interesting, and probably slightly unexpected, but that's where we are with it. But yeah, I think we'll have the Caicedo Enzo midfield back pretty soon, maybe even at the weekend for Man City. The Lavia one's going to be longer by the looks of it, and I agree with you. It does look short. I mean, crikey, when you looked at the team last night and the bench last night, as you say, they looked one midfield injury from having a real problem on their hands. I do think they also think that when defenders come back, there are ways of juggling things around slightly. I haven't been told explicitly how, but Enzo hinted at that as well last night. So whether that involves Chalabar or Reese or whoever, I don't know.
Yeah, interesting. I guess let's just dive into the incomings because that's the thing that I'm most curious about. Is there anyone in midfield that you are hearing outside of the loanees that could be potentially an option for Chelsea?
No, I'll be honest, no, because up until the last 24 hours, I've always been told that they weren't too worried about the midfield and it wasn't something they needed to look at. Obviously, we know that if Mainu were available, they would be there, but we laughed about it last time, and I still think it's one of those,
Yeah.
well, if so and so is available, then yeah, of course. I don't think Mainu will be available. But look, no is the honest answer. But the way, like I say, the way it was described to me was that if they didn't bring loans back, which I think might be something they have to consider, the other one would be to maybe accelerate something that they were already looking for the summer, rather than trying to. They hate trying to get stopgaps. These sporting directors and this ownership. The last sort of ownership and people in charge didn't mind a January stopgap. These guys really try to do everything they can not to get stopgaps, even though they don't mind trading players very fast and turning players over very fast.
And they will do a late assessment on either Leslie or Andre. Is that
so the assessment seems to be they will do a late assessment on exactly how long Lavia is going to be out or whether he's back by the end of January, where they are with that, and what they can do, whether it's literally choose between Andre or Leslie coming back, or whether there's a player that they're looking at for the summer that they get encouragement that they could actually do now. That will be the assessment. So it kind of incorporates all of it, really. But I am assured that they will be very careful to try not to leave themselves short in midfield.
Well, semi-reassuring, I suppose. Let's talk goalkeeper for a second. You wrote yesterday, amid all the transfer chatter, the January signing to really transform Chelsea would be a new top-class goalkeeper. Match of the day rolled out a stat that said only Muric from Ipswich has made more errors than Robert Sanchez, leading to a goal in the Premier League. Last night's was number 4. This has been a kind of weird one for a lot of Chelsea fans because in some statistical categories, save percentage and some other things, Sanchez has been more than adequate and certainly better than some goalkeepers that we've had in the past. But in other more serious ways, I think there's always an error there. And last night kind of proved that the physicality when rubber meets the road just isn't enough to overcome kind of some shaky hands. Where are you at with him, and what do you think Chelsea are looking at in terms of goalkeepers, if not for this window, then for a future window?
Yeah, he's not good enough. That's where I am with it. I mean, I started from this position. I wavered and thought maybe I'm being too harsh on him, and he's got the raw attributes there to do some very good things. He has saved them in some games this season as well. I'm not trying to say he's been awful, but if Chelsea are going to get to where Chelsea want to go, and given the caliber of of player they're looking to bring in different positions,
Right.
he's just not good enough. And look, Chelsea is some way still. We know this, but Chelsea is some way still from challenging from the title. But we also know that you have to get the goalie right to challenge for the title. Man City went through it with Claudio Bravo before they brought in Edison. We've had Karius at Liverpool, who Klopp tried his best to defend and stick by for a long time before bringing in Alisson. We've had, to a lesser extent, the Ramsdale Raya situation at Arsenal. It feels like most managers at the top clubs seem to have to go through this. They seem to have to go through this trying to make a goalkeeper work because he is talented, and then having to eventually accept he's actually not good enough. And really, I know Raya was a slight outlier in this, but generally, you have to just go and get a really top class one. And you have to probably spend a lot of money on one. Chelsea have spent loads of money on goalkeepers since Kepa. I mean, obviously Kepa being the world record, and that was just a big mistake. But since Kepa, they've spent a lot of money on goalkeepers, a lot of young goalkeepers as well. Mendy obviously wasn't young, but it's all kind of £20 million goalkeepers and all kind of punts on goalkeepers. And they'd be better off putting all that money together and trying to buy a 70, £80 million goalkeeper and actually solve the situation. And for me, they're never going to get where they want to get until they address that. And Maresca's saying all the right things. Look back on how Klopp spoke about Karius when Karius was making mistakes in the Champions League final and stuff like that. It would all be the same as what Maresca's saying. He has to stand by him. He has to be positive about him. You can't kill the guy because at the end of the day, they can't go and sort it out in January. The number 2 Jorgensen may be a prospect. I don't know, but he at the moment isn't good enough either. So Maresca's doing everything he can. He's doing the right thing. And like I say, look at how the other managers spoke about the goalkeepers who they ended up replacing. It was exactly the same. I'm convinced he will know. And for me, and I know other people will talk about the striker because Nicholas Jackson's still in this little barren patch. But for me, the most important thing they can do in the summer is to get a top-class goalkeeper.
Your words to Brandon Busby's ears, I think, on that front.
Although it doesn't matter what I say, it doesn't impact anything.
Well, I mean, the results will probably bear out close to averages. I mean, your point about kind of the evolution of these goalkeeper situations is that for Chelsea, you're in an extra precarious position. You have Sanchez and Petrovic, who you signed last summer. You have Jorgensen, who you signed this summer. You have a couple of guys out on loan who are young, unproven guys who you simply don't know what's going on. You have the kid Penders in Belgium. You have Gaga Slonina applying his trade. I think he's back at Chelsea now after a bit of a loan spell. Old saying from the NFL, if you have 2 quarterbacks, you don't have one. If you have 5 or 6 goalkeepers, you don't have one. How do you think Chelsea begin to sort this? I mean, it's if you were an opposition team and you came to Stamford Bridge looking for a goalkeeper, you'd have a number of options to select from. It's not just one.
I mean, we have a laugh about the number of goalkeepers. I kind of take all the young guys out of it, really, because look, if one of those young guys ends up being really good, then it's fine that they've got all those young guys for the one. And obviously, and obviously, at the moment, people are very excited about Penders. So let's see. I don't know, but let's see. And like I say, if one out of those young goalkeepers comes off, that's worked. That's fine. Having a lot of young goalkeepers out on loan here, there, and everywhere, not a problem for me. It's the it's probably, for me, the issue is around Sanchez, Jorgensen, Petrovic, all of whom aren't good enough to be Chelsea number one. All of whom, in my view, would probably be a perfectly adequate Chelsea number two. So for me, you decide which one you're going to have as your number two, and I think all of them would be good Premier League number twos, better than quite a lot of Premier League number twos, in all honesty.
Definitely. Yeah.
And then you go and get a top class one, and you try to sell at least one of them in my book. And I do think, look, if you decided to turn around and try and sell Sanchez tomorrow, I actually think, whether it be in the Premier League or in Spain or where else, I think you probably would. Well, I say tomorrow, you're not going to in the January transfer window, but in the summer, you probably would get a buy for him, because he's not terrible. He's not like an appalling goalkeeper. I'm not saying that about him. He's just not good enough for what Chelsea want to be.
Yeah. You mentioned striker earlier. There's a ton going on here, and obviously, I think this is all kind of conjecture-y right now that, Nico Jackson isn't scoring, so clearly he needs a bunch of competition behind him to motivate him to score, as if he's not motivated already. There's Benjamin Šeško, there's Dusan Vlahovic, there's the young kid Tell at Bayern. Are there any realistic striker names that could come in January and help Chelsea get out of the little goal rut that we have seen, not only from Nico Jackson, but from others?
So I struggle to see an out-and-out striker for January, but it's not to say they're not looking. Again, I think they're looking. They don't want to sign a stopgap, so I think we can rule Vlahovic out. I don't see them going there at all. I've received no encouragement that is a target.
Excellent. Good news.
I wouldn't rule out the fact that Juve tried to offer him the other way, and that's how that story's come about a little bit. But certainly, I don't think there's any real interest from Chelsea. I think people like Šeško, Delap. There was someone else I wanted to mention who I've forgotten. Osimhen might still be. I don't really see why Osimhen would have disappeared off it. They'll all be strikers that they're tracking for sure, and particularly Delap and Šeško. If they thought they could do a deal in January, or if another club suddenly made some progress in January, then I would expect Chelsea to move. I think otherwise it's more likely that becomes a summer thing, and that if they do sign someone to try and help a bit this window, it'll be a left winger who can either play through the middle also, or can just help contribute goals from elsewhere in the team, rather than it actually being someone to come in for Nico. But I do expect them to sign a striker in the fullness of time. I think it's more likely in the summer, and I do think Delap, Šeško will be right up there with the top targets.
You did mention attackers in broad strokes. There's been a brief that Chelsea would like an attacker who can play on the right, through the middle, or on the left, whatever that means.
On the left is predominant. Look, the what I am told is predominantly the left. Neto was signed as someone who could play both, but Neto, what they really saw it as, and I think we spoke about this in the summer, is that they were to have Madueke and Neto competing on the right. We knew that Cole was going to come into the middle and compete with sort of Nkunku stroke Felix. And we also knew that Sancho and Mudryk were the guys on the left.
Yeah.
We can't talk about too much about Mudryk, but obviously he's unavailable. We don't know how long for. And therefore, from where they were in the summer, they are obviously short of what they wanted on the left side, because they see Neto more predominantly as a right side. And I think you can see from his performances, I still don't think he's hit his stride yet really at Chelsea, but his more encouraging performances for me have been on the right than they have on the left. He doesn't look comfortable to me on the left.
Yeah. We've heard Garnacho, we've heard Gittins from Dortmund. Are there any other attackers that you're like tracking that could potentially be an option?
Well, you've heard Tell as well. I mean, the main three are the ones that are now out there. and they've been tracking them for a little bit. Gittins, I'd be astonished if he was available in January.
Yeah.
If they get some encouragement that they could do that in summer, it'd be interesting whether they'd be prepared to hold off everything else and wait for him, because he for me is the most exciting one out of the three. They've certainly made a check on Garnacho. Garnacho's agents were at Stamford Bridge last night. I'm told they weren't invited by the club. Agents apply for tickets all the time. The club gives them tickets. It might be semantics, but I don't think it was a case of them being invited by the ownership or the club. It could be some January game playing. But
Sure.
what I would say is the check on Garnacho is and was genuine, and there'll be more talks around that. There are obviously fears over his temperament, because he's had temperamental problems at Man United, and I think but there were fears over Jadon Sancho's temperament, and I know that they've been more than happy with him at Chelsea. So it could be that they end up believing that Garnacho's problems are more associated to Manchester United than they are to him as a lad. What I would say is I don't know why anyone would want to sign anyone from Manchester United at the moment. So Ahmad, take Ahmad out of it, who's covering himself in glory. Anyone would take Ahmad, but otherwise, why would you sign a Manchester United player at the moment? The manager said it himself. It's the worst Manchester United side in living history. So why would you want any of their players? Would be my Garnacho's very talented. He's taken Villa apart on many occasions, but I'd be worried about that. But they have made checks on him. All the noises from Germany are that Bayern don't want to sell and that Tell wants to stay. That doesn't seem to discourage Chelsea, though, which suggests to me that privately they're hearing different things. Whether that's linked to Nkunku or not, the fullness of time we'll see. But it's interesting that they're not moving away from Tell, despite the briefings that are coming out from Germany, which, again, just makes me think that privately they're hearing different things than are being put out publicly. There's a bit of a game going on with Napoli as well, because Napoli clearly want Garnacho. Napoli have now been linked to Tell in the Italian media as well. There's a bit of
shocks.
Exactly. There's a bit of to-ing and fro-ing and silliness going on. So it feels like it might run quite late into the window, whatever shakes down with these left wingers. But yeah, that's where Chelsea are currently looking.
You did report Mamadou Sarr moving from Strasbourg to Chelsea in the summer for a pretty low fee, 13 to 15 million euros.
I would love to be a fly on the wall on those negotiations.
Yeah, wow. Yeah.
So Strasbourg, would you be prepared to sell to Chelsea? Yes, Chelsea would be delighted to. How much money do you? I just love the thought of those negotiations. Imagine if the talks had broken down, the talks between themselves.
I mean, obviously this is a young kid. This is not a out and out starter sort of profile right away. Impressive for, I think his age. Is this a development type guy? Is there a chance that he goes back out on loan to Strasbourg? Like what's the vibe around him?
I don't know, if I'm honest with you. He's the young defender I've referenced for a couple of weeks that they were working on for the summer. I think a lot will depend on how he comes and looks in training in summer. It's kind of impossible to predict right now quite what. I'm sure they have got a plan, but until he's in the building and he's trained with them and the manager's had a view on him, it's kind of impossible to predict where he kind of lands for next season.
All right, let's take our last ad break, and then we'll just be back to quickly talk about some outgoings and a couple of fun questions for you to get you out of the January doldrums, Matt. So thanks to the sponsors, and we'll be right back. All right, the list. You mentioned earlier Dewsbury Hall still on the potential outs list for January.
So the closest where we
intention was to keep him, but what does that mean?
It doesn't mean anything, because then he said, but you never say never while the January window's stuck. Well, Enzo, you would say never if it was Cole Palmer. So
sure,
you can say never if you really want to say never. You just don't want to say never. Look, the closest to going out at the moment are Vega and Cassidy. Yep. They've had definite bids on those players. It's been well documented. Casadei's got a lot of interest from Italy. Vega seems to be Borussia Dortmund, Juventus, Marseille, I hear, are in the mix. Wolves have had a look. There's apparently another Premier League club who have had a look. Remarkable amount of interest around him, considering, you know, he hasn't, he's not done badly at all. In fact, at the start, I was quite impressed with him, but he's not pulled up any trees. But a lot of people obviously like his profile. He's clearly very, very versatile, which probably helps. And he's big physically. I'm sure he scores well on all the data with his physical. So maybe that's it. But those two, I think, at the moment are the closest. They have the firmest interest. Then you've got Disasi, who I still expect, if he can, will leave to play first team football. I think something might come up late for Disasi, but Disasi is certainly still in the mix. As we talked about, Dewsbury Hall, Chuck Wemaker, who for me would be a solution to look at on the left, but they just, for whatever reason, the manager won't look at him at all. When we talk about maybe needing some more options on the left for the remainder of the season, why not have a little look at him? But hey ho. Chuck Wemaker, who am I missing? And Nkunku's still, the talks with Bayern are still ongoing. The interest is still there. The situation remains the same with him. João Felix, all of a sudden, there's talk about AC Milan. Now, AC Milan do love a Chelsea player, and
they really
helped by the fact that every Chelsea player who seems to go there seems to play fantastically for them.
Yeah.
So no wonder. I can't see a scenario in which in January both Nkunku and João Felix are allowed to leave, because it would be sod's law that the very next week Cole Palmer would get injured, and then all the squad planning they've done would amount to nothing. So I would imagine it's one or none of those two rather than both of those two, and one's hopes of getting out to play more regular football might rest on what happens with the other one. I personally think they would rather, at this stage, if they can, sell Nkunku, because I think his value is held better at the moment, and is Bayern Munich are very serious about him. I think there's probably a belief that they can get a really good fee for Nkunku with his age and everything else. And I also think that they probably think that, I don't necessarily agree with this, but that João Felix can fill in if needed in a few more positions than Nkunku. But this is the thing. I mean, and this is slightly where they're going to have to take this into consideration moving forward. Having the sort of A and B team, as it were, that they've had, with some who kind of straddle in between both, the more experienced of those sort of B side players are always going to, in transfer windows, look to leave. If you've got a 27-year-old, if you've got a full international, they're going to be the guys who in a transfer window start looking at what their options are. If you've got younger players, they're probably more likely to accept the situation and not be looking. And I know Enzo had a laugh about it last week, but I can see why Enzo does probably believe it's a bit of a distraction for his squad at the moment. Because if you looked at the Wolves, if you looked at the squad for the Wolves game last night, you've got Keenan Dewsbury Hall, who's in the team, who could leave. You've got Disasi on the bench, who could leave, and Nkunku on the bench, who could leave. Felix, whose name is suddenly being brought up with a potential move. I mean, that's four players already I've just named very easily in the match day squad, who have got quite large doubts around their future. So it must be distracting to some degree.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, the Nkunku one, I think is the big variable, right? Because potentially a decent fee for him, right? Going back to Germany, a place where he dominated at Leipzig, but would obviously be with a better team in Bayern. If Chelsea were to see let's call it over under of 3 of these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 potential outs, would they look to do something major in January?
They've certainly looked at. Well, I don't think, for instance, when we talk about Garnacho, in terms of signing Garnacho, I think they would have to sell players. We saw how they operated in the summer, and it was a kind of 1 in, 1 out scenario. And I still think we're probably in that phase. I don't think they're going to want to spend and mess up their summer FFP and what they can do in the summer by spending 50 something million in the January window with nothing coming in. If they suddenly, it's an interesting thing you say. If they suddenly sold 4 or 5 for really good fees, and then yeah, I wouldn't rule out them trying to do something a bit bigger in January than maybe we think at the moment. They've done that before, and they do love a transfer window.
There's no doubt about that. And any news about Ben Chilwell, who is approaching?
I think he'll be a late. So there's still confidence and optimism that something will get sorted for him. The vibe I've always had, both from Chelsea and from his end, is that his options will come in the final week, because there are a lot of clubs talking about left backs and left wing backs, some of them in the Premier League, some of them outside of the Premier League, and also left backs and left wing backs who could move, who could create space elsewhere. There is a feeling that a market will move for him in the final week of the January transfer window. And the fact he has been sort of already given this pass to go out on loan means it feels like something can also happen late with him. It doesn't need to be in the offing, because I don't really think too much is in the offing at the moment. But I still sense optimism around a move for him.
So I'm getting most likely to least likely. I'll try and stack rank these for you right now. I'll throw Cassidy as most likely.
Yeah, Vega.
Feels like there's been more smoke. Vega. Disasi?
Well, the only thing with Disasi is that there's not an actual known suitor at the moment. So I would probably put Nkunku next, just because we know there's a club trying to set. Well, we know there's a club trying to sign Nkunku. It's all about whether a deal can be done.
Would you have Felix?
I would go Cassidy and Vega, then Nkunku, then probably Disasi.
Okay, so Disasi over Felix, who does have a known suitor,
and then probably Dewsbury Hall.
Oof. Okay.
I'm having, even though we have a suitor for Felix, I'm still having him quite low, because while there's a realistic chance of selling Nkunku, I don't think there's a realistic chance of Felix going. If the Nkunku thing falls down, then do a big swapperoo on those two, maybe.
Then Chilwell, Dewsbury Hall, and
actually put Chilwell. Even though we don't have a club for Chilwell at the moment, I'd still have Chilwell nice and high, actually, because I think that will happen come the end of the window.
Like 6, Dewsbury Hall and Felix to round it out.
Something like that, yeah. Something like that.
No suitor for Carnes at this point.
Yeah, Carnes should be in there. I'd have him about level with Dewsbury Hall. I need to sort of have a pen down with these, don't I? Because doing it off the top of my head is difficult. The league table of Chelsea outgoing.
That's what I'm saying. All right, so we got. I'll go through the list again. Cassidy, Vega.
Yes.
Nkunku. Disasi.
Then sort of Dewsbury Hall, Carney together. Chilwell in that, and Felix last.
Okay, there you go. All right, 2 fun questions to round this one out. From CFC Tahoe Blue, what's Matt's favorite doner kebab spot around the bridge? Asking for a friend. Are you a doner kebab?
No, really? I used to be when I was like a student, but that is, unfortunately, that's a very long time ago now. I've literally never had a kebab around the bridge. Can't help you. Yeah,
What's
sorry.
Wrong with you?
Yeah,
what is your favorite food spot around the bridge in general?
See, you're going to hate this answer. As the press, we are very privileged to be fed inside Stamford Bridge, and therefore me paying to eat outside Stamford Bridge would be vaguely ridiculous. Yeah. So I just don't have one around Stamford Bridge. Sorry. I have been known to pop into Nando's in the shopping centre.
Oh yeah, come on, that's a classic of the genre. BS Stalking Owl, which comes out with a big question that maybe we move into a future special of sorts, but areas the club are working on outside of the squads, facilities, stadium, community involvement, any like major blips there right now?
Can we do a different show on that, and I can answer it properly? And
Yes,
I
we will.
also, yeah,
We'll
I
punt
think
that one.
that's difficult just to like say in a very short answer. I think we should plan a show around that and do it properly for whoever asked it. Sorry
Excellent.
for not
Okay.
answering it now.
Well, BS talking on. We will get back to you. How about that? Look, lots going on, guys. Again, if transfer news changes between when we recorded this Tuesday afternoon UK time to when you were hearing this on Wednesday morning, it's the nature of the beast. You guys understand that, but
The nature of the beast is actually for me to come off this show, switch on my phone, and find there's several WhatsApp messages or something that completely override
yep,
what I've just said, actually.
I
And then
know
I text
that's.
you furiously saying, "Can we just edit that bit?"
Oh no. Yeah. Yeah, it's all good. We understand the game. So appreciate you, Matt. We will obviously touch base next week in the final
Yeah.
week of the transfer window. And yeah, until next time, Chelsea fans, you know what to do. Keep the blue flag flying high.